There's a woman whose name we'll never know. She clocked in one morning in 1976, coffee in hand, probably worried about being late. Maybe she had a fight with her husband that morning. Maybe her kids were sick. Maybe she was just tired. She sat down at her desk at Vanguard headquarters, stared at a mountain of paperwork, and made a mistake. Just a simple mistake. The kind we all make. A transposed number. A decimal point in the wrong place. The kind of error that makes your stomach drop when you realize what you've done. That mistake would eventually move trillions of dollars. It would make millionaires out of teachers and nurses. It would start a war on Wall Street that still rages today. But on that morning, she had no idea. None of us ever do. This is the story of how everything changed because someone got the numbers wrong. Let's rewind to years 1974. John Bogle sat in his office at Wellington Management, surrounded by boxes. He was being fired. At 45 years old, prime of his career, he was being thrown out of the company he'd helped build. It wasn't just a job loss, it was humiliation, public, brutal. His colleagues, people he considered friends, had voted him out. The financial press covered it. His reputation was in tatters. He went home that night and told his wife, Eve. They had 6 kids, a mortgage, responsibilities, and now, nothing. But here's what you need to understand about Bogle. He was stubborn, infuriatingly, brilliantly stubborn. And in those dark months, poring over data in his home office, he'd become obsessed with an idea. The data showed something that Wall Street didn't want anyone to know. Their genius fund managers. They were frauds. Not intentionally, they tried hard, worked long hours, but year after year, after they took their fees, 80% of them couldn't beat a simple market average. 80%. Wall Street was charging fortunes to deliver mediocrity. And Bogle thought, what if we just stopped trying? What if we admitted we couldn't beat the market and just matched it instead? Cut the fees to almost nothing. Give people the returns they deserved. By 1975, Bogle had clawed his way back. He'd founded Vanguard, named after the flagship of Admiral Lord Nelson, who'd fought against impossible odds. He was going to war with Wall Street, and his weapon, the world's first index fund. August 31st, 1976, launch day. Bogle had worked for months preparing. He'd pitched the idea to investors across the country, guaranteed average returns he'd promised, lowest fees on Wall Street, a fund that owns everything. He hoped to raise $150 million. Long pause. Voice drops. They raised $11 million. Another pause. It was a disaster, a catastrophic, public failure. Wall Street erupted in laughter. Competitors called it Bogle's folly. One executive called it un-American because apparently settling for average returns violated the Constitution somehow. The financial press mocked him, again, just like after Wellington. Voice becomes raw, emotional. Can you imagine? You risk everything on an idea you believe in. You put your reputation, what's left of it's on the line, and the world tells you you're an idiot. Bogle later admitted he went home that night wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe Wall Street was right. Maybe nobody wanted what he was selling. Pause, then shift to grim determination. But he had $11 million in investor money, and those investors trusted him, so he'd deliver. Even if it killed him, now came the hard part, actually building the thing. Here's what nobody had thought about. How do you buy 500 different stocks in exact proportion? This is 1976, no computers doing the work, no electronic trading. Every purchase required phone calls, paper confirmations, physical stock certificates. The New York Stock Exchange floor was still men in jackets shouting at each other, and Bogle wanted perfection. The fund had to mirror the market exactly. If IBM represented to 0.347% of the market, the fund needed to own exactly to 0.347% in IBM stock. Every company, every percentage, perfect. Voice becomes frantic. The Vanguard operations team worked around the clock, phones ringing, calculators chattering, order forms stacked in piles, traders barking confirmations. The office smelled like coffee and stress sweat. In the middle of this chaos sat our secretary. We don't know her name. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah had a pile of order forms 3 feet. Height, each one required perfect accuracy. Company name. Number of shares. Price limits. Every line had to be filled out correctly or the trade wouldn't execute. Slow down. Create intimacy. Maybe Sarah's hands were shaking from too much coffee. Maybe her eyes were blurry from staring at numbers for 10 hours straight. Maybe someone bumped her desk and she lost her place. Whatever happened, it happened. She wrote down the wrong number. Pause. Maybe it was for 1,500 shares instead of 5,400. Maybe she transposed digits. The details are lost to history, but when the dust settled and someone checked the math, they realized the fund didn't match. The index, they were off. Voice drops to almost a whisper, and Sarah's stomach drops straight through the floor. Imagine being Sarah in that moment. You've just screwed up the launch of your boss's dream project. The project he's staking his entire reputation on. The project that's already being called a failure, and you made it worse. Pause. Shift perspective. Now imagine being Bogle. You've already been humiliated once this year. Your revolutionary idea raised a pathetic $11 million. Wall Street is laughing at you. And now, you are discovering that your perfect index fund isn't even correct from day one. The team gathered in a conference room. Someone, maybe Sarah, tears streaming down her face, explained the error. The room exploded. Accusations flew. How did this happen? Who's responsible? What do we do? Slow down. Create tension. They had options. They could unwind the trade, sell what they'd bought wrong, buy what they needed. But that would cost money, transaction fees, market impact, days of delays. And every penny came from that precious dollar. 11 million, or they could pretend it never happened. Buy and hold. Hope nobody noticed. Voice becomes thoughtful. Wondering, but Bogle stared at the numbers. His analytical mind started working. Because here's what the error revealed. Perfect replication of an index is actually impossible. Think about it. The market moves every second. Prices change constantly. Even if you bought everything perfectly right now, by tomorrow you'd be off because some stocks went up more than others. Dividends arrive at different times. Companies get acquired. New companies join the index. Building to realization, the error wasn't a flaw in their execution. It was a revelation about the nature of reality. Perfection was a myth. The question wasn't whether they'd have tracking error. They always would. The question was how they managed it. Bogle made a decision that day that changed everything. They would document the error, track it precisely, then build systems to minimize and correct tracking errors over time through careful rebalancing. Because of Sarah's mistake, Vanguard built sophisticated tracking error management systems years before they otherwise would have. They developed proprietary algorithms for optimal rebalancing. They pioneered techniques for handling dividends efficiently. They learned to minimize transaction costs while maintaining accuracy. And when competitors eventually grudgingly admitted that maybe index funds weren't so stupid after all, when they tried to launch their own versions, they hit every problem Vanguard had already solved, problems they'd been forced to solve because of that first error. Sarah's mistake had given them a head start nobody could catch. But here's the thing that's almost cosmic in its irony. That initial tracking error, over time, it became completely meaningless, swallowed up by years and years of returns. The first decade was brutal. By 1981, the fund had grown to just $100 million. Bogle kept the faith, but barely. Vanguard was surviving, not thriving. Then, slowly, something changed. Academic studies started piling up. Burton Malkiel's A Random Walk Down Wall Street became a bestseller. Data emerged showing that active managers consistently underperformed, and investors started connecting the dots. Wait, you telling me I am paying 2% fees for a manager who underperforms? The market averaged by 1.5% after fees. So I'm losing 3.5% every year just by trying to beat the market. What if I just matched the market and kept my money? By 1990, the fund had $3 billion. By 1995, $15 billion. By 1999, it was the largest mutual fund in the world. Wall Street's mockery turned to anger, then fear, then desperate imitation. The un-American fund that guaranteed mediocrity. It was making regular people wealthy while Wall Street's genius managers delivered disappointment. Teachers and nurses who'd invested early, who'd trusted Bogle when everyone said he was crazy, retired as millionaires. The fund that launched with a pathetic $11 million and a clerical error. Today, Vanguard manages over $8 trillion. Index funds globally, more than $14 trillion. John Bogle died in 2019 at age 89. By then, he was called the father of index investing. Warren Buffett said Bogle had done more for American investors than anyone in history. But you know what Bogle said when people praise him? He talked about luck, about timing, about the team that made it work. He never mentioned Sarah's error specifically. Maybe he didn't even remember it by then. But he understood that perfection wasn't what made index funds successful. Simplicity was. Consistency was. Low costs were. Admitting you can't beat the market and that you don't need to. I think about Sarah sometimes. Whoever she was. Maybe she stayed at Vanguard for 30 years and retired comfortably on her index fund investments, never knowing she'd helped build the very thing that secured her future. Maybe she left after a few years, that error still burning in her memory as her worst professional moment. Maybe she's still alive somewhere, reading this, thinking, that was me. I was the one who screwed up. Sarah, if you're out there, thank you. Thank you for being human, for making a mistake, for forcing brilliant people to build better systems because you weren't perfect. Because here's what your story teaches us. Our mistakes don't have to define us. Sometimes they refine us. Sometimes they force innovation. We never would have discovered in pursuit of perfection. Every person listening to this who has money in an index fund who's building wealth steadily, paying minimal fees, not losing sleep over market, and maybe that's the most revolutionary idea of all. The secretary who changed investing forever probably never knew she'd done anything of the sort. But every revolution needs someone to strike the first match even if their hands were shaking when they lit it.